This little girl was thrown into the sewer by her cruel stepmother, but little did she know that a millionaire passing by in his luxurious helicopter saw everything, and what he did next will shock you. Comment on what you think will happen, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. The fog hung heavy over the industrial district that cold winter morning, like a thick grey blanket. The silence was broken only by the distant hum of machinery and the soft whir of wheelchair wheels across the damp concrete. Lily watched the world through her big brown eyes as her stepmother, Diane, pushed the wheelchair between the abandoned warehouses. "We're going for a different kind of stroll today, sweetie," Diane said, her voice melodious, a stark contrast to the firm grip on the wheelchair handles. "I want to show you how nature can grow even in the most unlikely places." Lily adjusted the blue dress over her still legs, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling growing in her chest. At 5 years old, she had already learned to read between the lines of Diane's smiles, to decipher what hid behind her sweet words. Since her father had died 8 months ago, those smiles had become more frequent and less sincere. "Is it much further, Mom Diane?" the little girl asked, her small voice almost swallowed by the vastness of the place. The affectionate title she used to use for her stepmother now came out as a hesitant whisper. "No, my love, we'll soon be at the special place I want to show you," Diane replied, guiding the chair along an increasingly uneven path. The creaking of the wheels against the rough ground echoed between the concrete walls. In the purse, swinging from her shoulder, Diane carried more than just Lily's usual tissues and medication. There was also a manila envelope with carefully folded documents, papers she had collected over months of discreet visits to courthouses and consultations with a lawyer of questionable reputation. The path began to slope slightly downwards, and Lily felt the first drops of a light drizzle touch her face. The air was different here, heavier, filled with a pungent smell that made her nose burn. Through the fog, she could make out the outline of large pipes snaking between the abandoned buildings. "Mom Diane, I don't think we should be here," Lily murmured, her small hands gripping the arms of the chair as one of the wheels rolled over a crack in the concrete. "Nonsense, sweetie, trust me," Diane replied, but there was something in her voice that made the hairs on the back of Lily's neck stand up. The chair stopped abruptly near an area fenced off by old boards. "Look there!" Diane pointed to some purple flowers growing between the cracks in the concrete. "See how life finds its way even in the most unlikely places." As Lily leaned forward to get a better look at the flowers, she felt the chair move slightly forward. Her heart raced when she realized they were very close to the edge of a drop-off. Through the fog, she could see the dark, oily surface of stagnant water several feet below. "Mom, Diane!" Lily's voice trembled. That's when she heard the soft click of the wheelchair brake being released. At the same instant, a sound cut through the air, the rhythmic thumping of helicopter blades approaching through the fog. Diane looked up, momentarily distracted. It was enough for her hand to slip on the rain-slicked chair. Lily felt the world spin as the chair began to tilt forward. Her small fingers grabbed the arms of the chair with all the strength she could muster, as a piercing scream escaped her throat. The sound of the wheels skidding on the damp concrete mingled with the echo of the helicopter getting closer and closer. "Mom, Diane!" she screamed one last time, but when she looked back, she saw only her stepmother's smile, a smile she would never forget. There was no more sweetness there, just a cold satisfaction that chilled her blood. The chair tilted further, and Lily felt the exact moment she lost contact with the ground. The world seemed to slow down as she fell, the cold air cutting her face, the noise of the helicopter blades louder and louder, as if trying to reach her before it was too late. Her last images were of the grey sky above, Diane's face getting further and further away, and the dark silhouette of the helicopter emerging through the fog. Then the icy darkness enveloped her, and Lily felt her body plunge into the toxic waters of the industrial drain. Richard Harding watched the industrial landscape through the helicopter window, his experienced eyes scanning the land he planned to expand his ranch. Years of managing land and raising cattle had taught him to recognize hidden potential even in the most unlikely places. However, nothing in his 42 years of life had prepared him for what he was about to witness. The pilot began to descend to a lower altitude for a more detailed inspection when something caught Richard's attention, a metallic glint that cut through the fog like lightning. His eyes fixed on the movement, and for a moment that seemed like an eternity, he saw the scene unfold, a wheelchair at the edge of a drop-off, a child and a woman. Then the unthinkable happened. "Go down! Go down now!" he yelled to the pilot, his body leaning instinctively forward as he watched the chair topple and the small figure plunge into the dark waters below. Without waiting for a response, he was already releasing his seatbelt. The helicopter descended in a forced landing on a nearby vacant lot. Richard barely waited for the blades to slow down before jumping out. His eyes quickly scanned the area, registering the distant sound of a car speeding away. On the ground, fresh tire tracks traced an erratic path away from the scene. There was no time to think about that now. Running to the edge of the drain, he saw bubbles rising to the surface of the dark water. His heart leaped when a small arm broke the surface for a second before disappearing again. With quick, precise movements, Richard tore off his jacket and tied one end to the helicopter landing gear, creating a makeshift rope. The resistant fabric of his tailored suit, which he had chosen hours before for an important meeting, would now serve to save a life. "Help me pull when I give the signal," he yelled to the pilot, who had already turned off the engine and was running towards him. Without hesitation, Richard climbed down the edge of the drain, his feet finding support. On the ledges of the concrete, the water was ice cold and had a grotesque consistency, thicker than normal. The chemical smell burned his nostrils as he plunged in, his eyes stinging as he tried to see in the toxic darkness. His lungs protested, but he continued swimming, guided only by instinct and the image of that small arm he had seen seconds before. Then his fingers touched something. Fabric. He gripped it tightly and pulled, feeling the weight of a small body. He propelled himself upwards with all the strength he could muster, emerging with a desperate gasp for air. In his arms, a girl, in a blue dress, her skin already turning a purplish hue. "Now, pull!" he bellowed to the pilot, who began to pull on the jacket-turned rope. Richard held the girl firmly against his chest as they were hauled up, each second an eternity as he watched the child's still face. As soon as they reached solid ground, Richard laid the girl on the ground and began the first aid procedures he had learned years ago when one of his employees had almost drowned in a reservoir. He pressed the small chest rhythmically, whispering words of encouragement that were as much for her as for himself. "Come on, little one, come on, breathe, you can do it." After what seemed like an eternity, the girl coughed violently, expelling dark water. Her eyes opened for a brief moment, disoriented and frightened, before closing again, but she was breathing. It was only then that Richard noticed other details, the marks on her small wrists, the bruises partially hidden by the sleeve of her dress, the way her legs were positioned unnaturally. Something was very wrong with this story. While they waited for the ambulance that the pilot had called, Richard found an abandoned purse near the scene. Inside it, in addition to personal documents identifying the girl as Lily Vespers, there was a disturbing amount of controlled medications and receipts for consultations with a lawyer. The distant sound of the ambulance siren began to cut through the air, but Richard barely registered it. His eyes were fixed on the girl's pale face, and in his mind, another image overlapped, that of his younger sister, Marina, who he had lost years ago due to medical negligence. The same fragile appearance, the same vulnerability that cried out for protection. When the paramedics arrived, they found a soaked and trembling Richard, refusing to let go of the girl's hand. Something inside him had changed irrevocably in those few minutes. As a cattle rancher, he knew well the instinct to protect the most, invulnerable. But this was different. It was deeper, more visceral. "I need to go with her," he told the paramedics, his voice brooking no argument. As they climbed into the ambulance, his eyes captured one last detail at the scene they were leaving behind. The overturned wheelchair, its wheels still spinning slowly in the fog, like a morbid weather vane reflecting the faint light of the sun that was beginning to break through the clouds. The municipal hospital wasn't far, but the trip seemed to last an eternity. Richard watched the paramedics work, his heart aching each time Lily coughed up more of that dark water. Questions piled up in his mind. Who was the woman who had abandoned her? Why try to kill a defenseless child? What did those documents in the purse mean? As the ambulance snaked through the streets of the city, Richard made a silent promise to the unconscious girl. He would find out the truth, no matter what it cost. He would not allow another child to be a victim of adult cruelty, not while he could do something about it. What he didn't yet know was that this promise would take him on a journey far more complex than he could imagine, unraveling a web of secrets that would forever change not only Lily's life, but also his own. The cold lights of the municipal hospital bathed the hallway where Richard waited, still with his wet clothes clinging to his body. The smell of chemicals from the industrial drain had mixed with the characteristic antiseptic of the hospital environment, causing a constant nausea that he tried to ignore. His eyes did not leave the door of the pediatric emergency room, through which Lily had disappeared in the arms of the medical team. A middle-aged nurse, with a name tag identifying her as Regina, approached him for the third time that hour. "Mr. Harding, I have some forms that need to be filled out. You said you're not related to the girl, but you were the one who brought her in." "I can't fill anything out without knowing how she is," Richard replied, his voice hoarse with worry. "It's been 2 hours. Why won't anyone tell me anything?" Regina sighed, her eyes softening. "They are doing all the necessary tests. The situation is delicate. That water, well, it wasn't just water, you know. We need to make sure there was no serious contamination." At that moment, the door to the emergency room opened and a doctor with a serious expression came out, removing her surgical mask. Richard stood up instantly, feeling his heart race. "I'm Dr. Paula Mendez," she introduced herself, extending her hand. "Are you the one who rescued the girl?" Richard nodded, shaking the offered hand. "How is she?" "We managed to stabilize her. It was a providential rescue. A few more minutes in that water." The doctor consulted her clipboard. "But there are other issues that concern me. The tests revealed a disturbing picture." She led Richard to a private room where X-rays were displayed on a light box. "See these marks here?" She pointed to several clear lines on the bones. "These are old, poorly healed fractures. Some are less than a year old. Others seem older." Richard's stomach clenched. "How old is this child?" 5 years old, the doctor replied, her voice laden with contained anger. "And from what we can see, many of these injuries occurred in recent months. There are also restraint marks on her wrists and ankles, consistent with prolonged physical restriction." Richard closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the purse found at the scene of the incident. There were many medications in her purse, controlled substances. Dr. Paula nodded gravely. "We found traces of sedatives in her blood, at levels concerning for a child of that age. Mr. Harding, this was not an accident. Someone was trying to kill her," Richard finished, his voice a tense whisper. "I saw. There was a woman. She just left after the chair fell. At that moment, they were interrupted by a nurse who rushed into the room. "Doctor, the patient has woken up and is asking for Mom Diane." Richard and the doctor exchanged meaningful glances before heading to the room. Lily was sitting in bed, looking even smaller and more fragile against the white hospital sheets. Her eyes, although tired, maintained a surprising vivacity. "Hi, little one," Richard approached cautiously. "Do you remember me?" Lily studied him for a moment before answering in a low voice. "You were in the sky. You came flying to get me." "That's right," he smiled gently. "My name is Richard. You can call me Rich if you want." The girl nodded slightly, her fingers playing with the edge of the sheet. "Is Mom Diane going to come get me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Before anyone could answer, a commotion in the hallway caught everyone's attention. An elegant woman, approximately 35 years old, entered the room like a hurricane, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "My darling, my love!" Diane rushed towards the bed, but was stopped by Richard, who instinctively placed himself between her and Lily. "How dare you?" she protested. "I am her mother." "Stepmother," corrected Dr. Paula, consulting the medical chart. "Mrs. Diane Ruth, I presume?" "Yes, and I demand to know why I wasn't notified immediately. I've been looking for my little girl everywhere. When I heard about the accident—" Diane sobbed dramatically. Richard watched as Lily's fingers gripped the sheet tighter, as her eyes fixed on a distant point on the wall. There was fear there, but also something else. A resignation that no 5-year-old should. "No." "Mrs. Ruth," Dr. Paula's voice was icy, "we'd like to better understand how your stepdaughter ended up alone in a restricted industrial area." "Alone?" Diane seemed shocked. No. I was with her. We went for a walk to see the flowers growing between the concrete. I just got distracted for a moment," her voice faltered. "It was a terrible accident. Mom Diane slipped," Lily spoke suddenly, her voice small but firm. "It wasn't her fault." Richard felt his heart clench at hearing the child's protective lie. Even after everything, she was still trying to defend the woman who had tried to kill her. What had happened to create such loyalty? Or was it fear? "Of course it wasn't anyone's fault, my love." Diane approached the bed, finally managing to get past Richard. Her expensive perfume filled the room as she leaned down to kiss Lily's forehead. "Mommy's here now. Everything will be okay." But Richard didn't miss the way Lily's shoulders tensed at the touch, how her breathing quickened. And he also didn't miss the calculating glint in Diane's eyes when she turned to face him. "And you are?" she asked, measuring him from head to toe. "Richard Harding, the man who prevented your distraction from becoming a tragedy," he replied, keeping his voice controlled despite the anger that was seething inside him. "Ah, yes," Diane smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "What a coincidence that you were flying over just that area so isolated." The veiled threat in her words did not go unnoticed. Richard held her gaze, making it clear that he would not be easily intimidated. The tension in the room was palpable, broken only by the soft sound of Lily's breathing and the constant beeping of the monitors. "Mrs. Ruth," Dr. Paula intervened, "we'll need to run some more tests, and there are some irregularities that we need to discuss in private." Diane straightened her posture, adjusting the designer purse on her shoulder. "Of course, Doctor. Anything for my little one." She turned to Lily, her voice melodious again. "Mommy will be back soon, sweetie. Rest." As Diane followed the doctor out of the room, Richard noticed that Lily finally relaxed against the pillows, as if an invisible weight had been temporarily removed from her small shoulders. "Can you stay?" she asked timidly, her eyes meeting his. "Just for a little bit?" "Of course," Richard replied, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "I'll stay here as long as you need me to." What he didn't say, what didn't need to be said, was that he had already made his decision. He wouldn't leave that hospital until he was sure Lily was safe, even if it meant facing Diane Ruth and all the dark secrets she seemed to be hiding. In the hallway, Diane's sugary voice could be heard arguing with the doctor. But inside the room, Richard began to tell stories about the animals on his ranch, watching how Lily's eyes sparkled with each word, as if glimpsing a different world, a world where children didn't have to lie to protect adults who should be protecting them. The next morning, Richard returned to the hospital bringing with him a small backpack with clean clothes and a teddy bear that he had bought in the gift shop on the ground floor. He found Lily awake, playing distractedly with the edge of the sheet while watching cartoons on the small TV in the room. Her face lit up when she saw him. "You came back!" she exclaimed, a genuine smile replacing the anxious expression that seemed to be her constant companion. "Of course I came back," Richard replied, placing the bear next to her on the bed. "And I brought a friend." Lily hugged the stuffed animal cautiously, as if she wasn't used to receiving gifts. "Can I really keep him?" The innocent question made Richard's heart clench. What kind of life had this child led to doubt even a simple gift? Before he could answer, a familiar voice sounded from the door. What a touching scene. Diane was standing in the doorway, wearing an elegant pastel-toned ensemble that contrasted with the poorly concealed dark circles under her makeup. In her hands, she held a designer bag that tinkled slightly. More medications, Richard suspected. "Mom, Diane," Lily whispered, unconsciously squeezing the bear tighter against her chest. "Sweetheart, I brought your medication." Diane approached the bed, casting a cold glance at Richard. "You didn't need to bother coming back. You've already done more than enough." "It was no bother at all," he replied, keeping his voice calm, despite the tension that had settled in the room. "In fact, I took advantage of the morning to make some interesting calls." Something flickered on Diane's perfectly composed face. "Calls?" "Yes. To my friend Carlos Mendonca, for example. He's a notary public and was very interested in some irregularities he found in Lily's father's will." The change was subtle but noticeable. Diane's fingers gripped the handle of the bag so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her smile, however, remained fixed like a mask. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice now with a dangerous edge. "All the documents are in order. I am Lily's legal guardian." "For now," Richard replied, watching how she would react. At that moment, Dr. Paula entered the room, accompanied by a middle-aged woman carrying a folder. "Good morning. This is Maria Elena Torres, our social worker." Diane immediately changed her posture, returning to the role of devoted stepmother. "How nice that you came. I was just organizing my little girl's medications." "About that," the social worker consulted her notes, "we'd like to better understand Lily's medical history, especially considering that several of these medications are not listed in her official record." "Oh, I have all the prescriptions," Diane protested, rummaging in her purse. "They're for her well-being, to help her sleep, to calm the seizures." "Seizures?" Maria Elena raised an eyebrow. "What kind of seizures?" She gets very agitated sometimes since her father's death. The doctor said it was best to keep her calm." "What doctor?" Dr. Paula asked. "Because in the last 6 months, according to our records, Lily has not had any regular checkups. Not even her vaccinations are up to date." Richard watched the scene unfold, noticing how Lily seemed to try to make herself smaller and smaller, in the bed, as if she wanted to disappear. He approached her and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. "This is absurd," Diane raised her voice. "I'm taking perfectly good care of her. Who are you to question my methods? I'm the only family she has." "That's not true." Lily's small voice surprised everyone. "There's Aunt Helen, too." Diane's face lost all colour. Lily, sweetheart, we've talked about this. Your aunt is travelling far away. Aunt Helen? Richard leaned in, interested. Who is she? No one, Diane cut in sharply. A sister of her father's that we lost touch with years ago. We don't even know if she's still alive. But Richard didn't miss the momentary panic in her eyes. There was something there, an important piece of the puzzle that was beginning to form. The social worker was furiously taking notes in her notepad. Mrs. Ruth will need a more in-depth investigation into the situation. For now, I recommend that Lily remain hospitalized for observation. You can't do that. She needs to come home with me. Actually, Dr. Paula intervened, we can, especially considering the results of the toxicology tests that have just arrived. Diane froze. What tests? The ones that show alarming levels of sedatives in her system, medications that have not been prescribed by any registered pediatrician. Mrs. Ruth, do you have any explanation for this? The silence that followed was deafening. Diane opened and closed her mouth several times, her veneer of perfection finally beginning to crack. This is persecution, she finally exploded. You have no idea what it's like to take care of a special needs child, the expenses, the necessary dedication. Daddy's properties help, right? Lily spoke again, her voice trembling but resolute. You always say that without them, we wouldn't have money for anything. Richard exchanged a meaningful look with the social worker. There it was, the possible motive behind everything. Money, always money. Lily, shut your mouth, Diane hissed, completely losing her composure. You don't know what you're talking about. Mrs. Ruth, Maria Elena intervened, shocked. That kind of behavior. Don't tell me how to talk to my daughter. You have no right. You can't. I'm going to call my lawyer. Diane spun on her heels and stormed out of the room like a hurricane, leaving behind a heavy silence and a bag of medications forgotten on the floor. Lily began to tremble, silent tears streaming down her face. Richard sat on the edge of the bed and hugged her gently, feeling how tense she was, as if she wasn't used to demonstrations of affection. It's going to be okay, he murmured, exchanging worried glances with the other two women in the room. No one is going to hurt you again. Dr. Paula approached, checking the monitors. Lily, sweetie, you were very brave. Now you need to rest. A little, okay. The girl nodded, still clutching the teddy bear, as if it were her last line of defense against the world. Mr. Harding, Maria Elena gestured for him to accompany her to the hallway. Once out of the room, she spoke in a low voice. We need to find this Aunt Helen, and we need to find out exactly what is happening with the assets left by her father. Richard nodded, his mind already working on the possibilities. I'll ask Carlos to investigate the will further. And I have some contacts who can help locate the aunt. Great, because something tells me that Diane Ruth won't give up easily. And the more information we have, the more chance we have to protect Lily, Richard completed, his gaze returning to the girl in the room, who was now talking softly to her new teddy bear, as if telling him all the secrets she couldn't share with anyone else. What none of them knew was that Diane, at that very moment, was in her car, making a desperate call. We need to speed up the process, she whispered into the phone. I don't care how. That girl is talking too much, and there's a nosy rancher, complicating everything. I can't lose control now, not when we're so close. Geesh. The walls of Carlos Mendonca's office were covered in law books and framed certificates, but it was the stack of documents on his desk that caught Richard's attention that afternoon. The notary public, a man of 60 with grey hair and reading, glasses hanging around his neck, flipped through page after page of Lily's father's will with an increasingly worried expression. It's worse than we imagined, Richard, Carlos said, removing his glasses and rubbing his tired eyes. The will itself is perfectly legal, but there is something very strange about the way guardianship was transferred after the father's death. How so? Richard leaned forward in his chair, feeling that familiar tension in his stomach that always accompanied his suspicions about Diane. You see, Carlos separated some documents. Ricardo Vespers, Lily's father, was a very cautious man. He included several protection clauses in the will. For example, there is one specifically that allows the transfer of guardianship to a good faith protector if the legal guardian is shown to be incapable or negligent. Can that help us? It can. But the most interesting thing is this. He pointed to a specific paragraph. The properties that generate the monthly income that supports Lily, they cannot be sold until she turns 21. It's a considerable estate. 3 commercial buildings in the city center, all leased to solid companies. Richard whistled softly. How much does that generate per month? Enough to explain why Diane is so desperate to maintain control, Carlos replied, flipping through some more papers. But here's what worries me. In recent months, there have been attempts to alter some of these clauses, requests made by a lawyer named Marcus Peixoto. His name was on the receipts I found in Diane's purse, Richard recalled, feeling the pieces begin to fit together. Exactly, and he's not a lawyer with a good reputation, specialist in finding loopholes in wills, if you understand me. At that moment, Richard's phone vibrated. It was a message from the social worker. Urgent. Lily had a crisis after Diane's visit. Come to the hospital. Richard stood up abruptly, his heart racing. I need to go. Something happened to Lily. Go, Carlos waved, gathering the documents. I'm going to continue investigating. There's something about a sister of the deceased that I need to check out. The drive to the hospital seemed endless, even with Richard driving as fast as he dared. When he finally arrived at Lily's room, he found a scene that made his blood boil. The girl was huddled in bed, trembling violently, while Dr. Paula tried to calm her down. What happened? He asked, quickly approaching the bed. Diane was here. Maria Elena, the social worker, replied in a low voice. She managed to get in when I changed shifts with my colleague. She was alone with Lily for a few minutes. And after she left, Lily began to have trouble breathing. She's panicking. We can't calm her down. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, speaking softly. Lily, it's me, Rich. I'm here. The girl raised her tearful eyes to him. She said, and her voice faltered, punctuated by sobs. What did she say, little one? That it's my fault, Lily finally managed to say. That Daddy's money is running out because of me. That if I didn't exist. The anger that Richard felt was so intense that he needed to take several deep breaths before he could speak. Lily, look at me. None of that is true. Your stepmother is lying. But the medicines are expensive, the girl insisted, still trembling. And the wheelchair and... Sweetheart, Dr. Paula gently intervened. We've discovered that many of those medications weren't even necessary. In fact, they were making you sick. And about the money, Richard added, your father left everything organized. There's more than enough money to take care of you. It was then that Lily said something that made everyone in the room freeze. Aunt Helen always said that too, before she disappeared. Maria Elena immediately grabbed her notepad. Lily, can you tell us more about your Aunt Helen? The girl hesitated, biting her lower lip. Mom Diane said I can't talk about her, that it's a secret. It's okay, Richard assured her. You're safe here. You can tell us. Slowly, as if each word cost a tremendous effort, Lily began to speak. Aunt Helen lived with us after Daddy died. She took care of me while Mom Diane worked, but she argued a lot with Mom Diane about Daddy's papers. What papers? Maria Elena asked softly. I don't know exactly, but one day Aunt Helen said she was going to tell everything to the police, that she wasn't going to let Mom Diane do something wrong. Lily hugged the teddy bear tighter. The next morning, she was gone. Mom Diane said she ran away because she didn't like me anymore, but But you didn't believe that, Richard gently completed. Lily shook her head. Aunt Helen loved me. She would never leave without saying goodbye. Dr. Paula and Maria Eleanor exchanged worried glances. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. The story was taking a much darker turn than he had initially imagined. Lily, he asked cautiously, do you remember exactly when your Aunt Helen disappeared? It was after my birthday. She had given me a hidden storybook because Mom Diane didn't let me read much. She said it was our secret. And where is that book now? I don't know, Lily replied sadly. It disappeared along with my other things when we moved house. At that moment, a nurse entered the room with a glass of water and the evening medications. But when she approached the bed, Lily began to tremble again. I don't want it, she cried, trying to get away. Please, I don't want any more medicine. Calm down, Richard quickly intervened. No one is going to force you to take anything you don't want. He looked at Dr. Paula, who nodded in agreement. Only the essential medications now, the doctor confirmed, and all properly prescribed and documented. While they calmed Lily and helped her get settled for the night, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Helen, a witness who had mysteriously disappeared after threatening to expose something. A loving aunt who vanished without a trace. There was much more to this story than a simple dispute over money. Outside the room, Maria Elena pulled him to a discreet corner of the hallway. We need to find Helen, she whispered, and quickly. Because if what I'm suspecting is true, Diane may have done something much worse than just stealing a child's money, Richard completed, his expression grim. Exactly, and if she was able to make one person disappear, she's capable of anything, he concluded, looking back at the room where Lily had finally fallen asleep, clutching the teddy bear. We need to act fast, before it's too late. The drizzle that fell that morning seemed to match Richard's somber mood as he drove through the streets of the old city centre. Beside him, in the passenger seat, a folder full of documents that Carlos had separated about Helen Vespers. The information was scarce, but enough to begin an investigation. Last known address, former place of work, telephone numbers that no longer worked. His first destination was a small private school where Helen had taught literature before her brother's death. The old building, with its exposed brick walls and high windows, maintained an air of discreet dignity even under the grey sky. In the office, a lady with white hair tied in an austere bun looked up from the papers she was organizing when Richard entered. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," he replied, introducing himself and explaining briefly that he was looking for information about Helen. "Ah, Ms. Helen!" The lady's face, who introduced herself as Mrs. Beatrice, softened with recognition. "A terrible loss for our school. The children adored her." "Loss?" Richard leaned forward slightly. "How so?" "Well, when she resigned so abruptly, it was right after her brother's death, you know. She said she needed to take care of her niece." Mrs. Beatrice rummaged in a drawer and pulled out a yellowed folder. "Actually, we still have some of her things here. She never came back to get them." The folder contained some books, lesson plans, and to Richard's surprise, a small diary. "Can I take a look?" Of course, of course. Helen was always so organized, she kept a record of everything." Flipping through the pages of the diary, Richard found mainly notes about classes and students, but in the last pages, the tone changed dramatically. The handwriting, normally elegant and controlled, became more urgent, almost frantic. "Something is wrong. D is giving L too much medicine. She says they're prescribed, but I've never seen a doctor. I need to investigate." Found strange documents in D's drawer. Attempts to alter the will. Why? The last entry, dated 3 days before her disappearance, made Richard hold his breath. "I found out everything. The properties, the fake Accounts, the plan to incapacitate L. I need to act fast. Mark will help me gather the evidence. Tomorrow we will... The sentence ended abruptly. The following pages were blank. Mrs. Beatrice, Richard called, showing the diary. Who is Mark? The lady adjusted her glasses thoughtfully. Ah, that must be Mark Rodriguez. He was a math teacher here at the time. He and Helen were very close. In fact, she lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. I think they were more than friends, if you know what I mean. And where can I find him? Mrs. Beatrice's smile disappeared. Unfortunately, you can't. Mark suffered a terrible car accident in the same week that Helen disappeared. He didn't survive. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. Too much of a coincidence. Leaving the school, he immediately called Maria Elena. We need to investigate a car accident. Mark Rodriguez, approximately 8 months ago. What did you find? The social worker asked, sensing the urgency in his voice. As he explained about the diary and his discoveries, Richard drove towards the hospital. Something in the tone of Helen's last notes had left him uneasy, even more worried about Lily's safety. Arriving at the girls' room, he found a scene that confirmed his worst fears. The bed was empty, the sheets disarranged. Dr. Paula was on the phone, her voice tense. Yes, we need an immediate search. The stepmother took her without authorization, less than an hour ago. How did this happen? Richard demanded, feeling the panic growing. Diane appeared with a court order, Maria Elena explained, appearing in the hallway. Apparently, her lawyer got an emergency injunction claiming that we were illegally detaining Lily. But what about all the medical reports, the evidence of neglect? Technically, we haven't formalized any charges yet, the social worker replied, frustrated. And Diane has legal custody. The judge who signed the injunction probably didn't even look at the case properly. A door was bought off, Richard murmured, remembering the documents he had found about the lawyer, Marcus Peixoto. Where would she take Lily? Not home, Maria Elena replied. I already sent a team to check. The apartment is empty. It seems she planned everything. At that moment, Richard's cell phone rang. It was Carlos. Richard, you need to see this. The notary public's voice was full of concern. I just received a notification. Diane has filed an application for emergency sale of Lily's properties. She can't do that. The will prohibits. Yes, but she's claiming medical necessity, saying that Lily needs an experimental treatment abroad. With the injunction she got, plus this request for authorization, she's trying to liquidate everything as quickly as possible. Richard's mind worked frantically. If Diane managed to sell the properties and transfer the money out of the country. The documents that Helen discovered, he said suddenly, they had to be somewhere. Mrs. Beatrice said that Helen was organized, kept a record of everything. The old house? Maria Elena exclaimed. Lily mentioned that they moved after the aunt's disappearance. Maybe... Do you have the address? I can get it from her school records. While Maria Elena ran to her office to find the information, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Helen's diary, about the last words written with such urgency. What exactly had she discovered? And more importantly, where was Lily now? His phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. When he opened it, his heart almost stopped. It was a photo of Lily, clearly taken just minutes ago. The girl was in her wheelchair, looking scared, in a place that he immediately recognized, the same location in the industrial district where it had all begun. Below the photo, a message. Come alone. You have 1 hour. Dr. Paula, who had finished her call, approached him. Any news? Richard hesitated for only a second before showing her the message. We can't call the police. She's already proven that she has connections, that she can manipulate the system. If we involve the authorities... Lily could get hurt, the doctor completed, understanding the gravity of the situation. But you can't go alone. It's obviously a trap. I have no choice, he replied, already heading for the door. But I need you to do something for me. Search the Vesper's old house. Helen discovered something important, something that Diane would do anything to hide. The answer has to be there. And you? I'm going to do what I promised Lily on the first day. I'm going to protect her, no matter the cost. As he drove towards the industrial district, Richard couldn't help thinking about his own sister, about how he had failed to protect her years ago. Not this time, he muttered to himself. This time it's going to be different. The rain had thickened, and the first thunder could be heard in the distance. A storm was approaching, both literally and figuratively, and Richard knew that the next few hours would determine not only Lily's fate, but also reveal truths that had cost Helen and Mark their lives. The question was, could he get there in time to prevent history from repeating itself? The industrial district seemed even darker under the approaching storm. Richard parked his car a safe distance away and continued on foot, his steps echoing against the wet concrete. The place was different from the first time. More guards, more cameras. Diane had clearly prepared for this moment. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Maria Elena and Dr. Paula arrived at the former residence of the Vespers. The two-story house, with its peeling facade and unkempt garden, looked abandoned for months. A for sale sign hung crooked on the rusted gate. "How are we going to get in?" the doctor asked, nervously looking around. Maria Elena pulled a set of keys from her pocket. "Technically, as a social worker investigating a case of child neglect, I have the authority to check former residences of the family." She gave a half smile. "Technically." In the industrial district, Richard advanced cautiously between the warehouses. The chemical smell of the drain still lingered in the air, mixed now with the ozone of the impending storm. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the metal structures around him. "Welcome to our little meeting," Diane's voice sounded behind him, making him turn quickly. She was standing a few feet away, elegant as always in her grey suit. But there was something different in her eyes, a glint of barely contained desperation. "Where is Lily?" "Ah, always straight to the point," Diane laughed, but the sound was devoid of humor. "She's safe. For now. In fact, she's exactly where it all began. Poetic, don't you think?" In the house, Maria Elena and Dr. Paula climbed the stairs carefully, the floorboards creaking under their feet. The room that had been Helen's still held some belongings. A dusty desk, empty shelves, a bed disarranged as if its occupant had left in a hurry. "Look at this," Maria Elena pointed. "The marks on the wall behind the desk. It looks like there was a safe here." "That was removed," Dr. Paula completed, running her fingers across the empty space. "But not professionally. Look at the force marks." In the industrial district, Richard kept his eyes fixed on Diane as she walked in circles around him, like a predator studying her prey. "You know what's most interesting about all this?" she continued, her voice taking on an almost confidential tone. "How people can be so blind. Helen, for example, so dedicated, so righteous. She thought she had discovered everything, that she was going to be the great heroine. What did you do with her?" "Me? Nothing." Diane smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "It was a terrible accident, just like the one with Professor Mark. Sometimes fate conspires in mysterious ways, doesn't it?" In the house, Maria Elena had found something behind a loose board at the bottom of the closet, a manila envelope, sealed and addressed to the district attorney. "Oh my God," she murmured, opening the envelope with trembling hands. "These are copies of all the documents, bank transfers, fake contracts, forged medical prescriptions. And this," Dr. Paula picked up a sheet that had fallen to the floor. "It's an original medical report from Lily's father. He didn't die of natural causes, as stated on the death certificate. He was poisoned." A weak voice sounded from the doorway, making the two women jump. There, leaning against the doorframe, was a thin woman, with grey hair and a marked face, but with the same determined eyes that Lily had. "Helen?" Maria Elena whispered, incredulous. Back in the industrial district, a particularly loud clap of thunder made the ground vibrate. Richard took a step forward, his patience running out. "Enough games, Diane. What do you want?" "What do I want?" She laughed again, the sound mingling with another clap of thunder. "I want what's rightfully mine. I've spent years planning everything. First, I got close to Ricardo. So easy to manipulate, so needy after his wife's death. Then, it was just a matter of time and the right dosage of certain medications. You killed him." Richard felt his blood run cold. "And now you're doing the same to Lily." "No!" Diane exploded, her mask of control finally cracking. "She's the problem. That wheelchair, the endless treatments. Ricardo changed the will because of her. All the money, all the properties, everything tied up in a trust that only she can access when she grows up. But if she dies..." Her smile returned, more sinister than ever. "Everything automatically goes to the legal guardian." In the old house, Helen approached the other two, women with uncertain steps. "I've been hiding all this time. After Mark, after the accident, I knew I would be next. But I couldn't leave without the evidence." "Why didn't you seek help?" Dr. Paula asked gently. "I tried, but Diane has connections everywhere. Every person I reached out to, every authority. Someone always warned her, so I waited, gathered more evidence, and..." Her voice faltered, "watched from afar as she hurt my niece." In the industrial district, the rain finally poured down in full force. Richard barely felt the water soaking his clothes, focused only on Diane and the terrible implications of her words. "Where is she?" he asked again, his voice low and dangerous. Diane pointed to a nearby warehouse. "Inside, with a little surprise I prepared. You know how chemicals can be dangerous when mixed incorrectly." Richard's blood ran cold. "You wouldn't I?" She tilted her head, studying him. "I've already killed 3 people to get here. What's one more? Especially one that no one will miss." In the old house, Helen had sat down on the old bed, her hands trembling as she held the documents. She'll try something today, after she got the injunction, after taking Lily out of the hospital. It's her pattern. She always returns to the scene of the first crime. Maria Elena was already on the phone. "I need to speak to Detective Costa urgently. It's about the Vespers case." But Helen shook her head. "There won't be time. She chose that place for a reason. The ducts, the chemicals. It's the perfect setting for another accident." In the industrial district, Richard took another step towards the warehouse, but Diane pulled something from her blazer, a small remote control. "One more step, and I'll trigger the vapors. I've already calculated everything. In less than 2 minutes, that warehouse will become a lethal chamber. Unless you sign this." She pulled an envelope from the inside pocket of her blazer. "A confession, admitting that you tried to kidnap Lily to gain access to her inheritance. That all the accusations against me were invented by you. Why? Because I need a scapegoat, someone to take the blame when everything comes to light. And you, my dear, with your story of heroic rescue, are the perfect candidate." The rain was falling even harder now, thunder echoing non-stop. Richard could feel time running out, each precious second slipping away like the water soaking the ground. "Tick-tock," Diane crooned, waving the remote control. "What's it going to be? Your reputation or her life?" At that moment, a muffled cry came from the warehouse, Lily's voice calling for help. Richard's heart felt like it was about to explode in his chest as his mind raced, trying to find a way out. But with Diane's finger on the button of the remote, with lethal chemicals ready to be released, he knew that his options were limited. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, 3 women were running desperately towards the industrial district, carrying with them the evidence that could end Diane's reign of terror once and for all. The question was, would they arrive? In time, the industrial warehouse emanated a pungent smell that made Richard's eyes water even from the outside. Through the dirty windows, he could vaguely see the silhouette of Lily's wheelchair. The muffled sound of her voice calling for help was like a knife twisting in his chest. "Time is running out," Diane warned, her melodious voice contrasting with the cruelty of the situation. The remote control in her hand trembled slightly, the only visible sign that she too was under extreme stress. "Sign the confession and we all get out of here. Refuse and well," she shrugged, a studiedly casual gesture. Richard took the papers she offered, feeling the weight of each second. The heavy rain made it difficult to read the words, but enough was visible. A detailed confession of crimes he had not committed, a carefully constructed narrative that painted him as a con artist trying to take advantage of a vulnerable child. "How can I be sure that you'll let her go after I sign?" Diane's smile was glacial. "You can't, but it's your only option, isn't it?" Meanwhile, less than a mile away, a car cut through the storm at high speed. Helen, although still weak, gave precise directions to Maria Elena, who was driving. "There!" Helen pointed to a side entrance of the industrial complex. "There's a maintenance passage. We can enter without being seen." In the back seat, Dr. Paula frantically organized the documents found in the house. "We need a plan. Diane won't simply surrender, even with all this evidence." "No," Helen agreed, her voice filled with steely determination. "But I know my sister-in-law. She always has a plan B, and it always involves chemicals," Maria Elena completed, recalling the toxicology reports of Ricardo Vespers. Like the first time. Back at the warehouse, Richard took a calculated step forward, keeping his eyes fixed on the remote control in Diane's hand. "Before I sign, I want to see Lily." "You're not in a position to make demands," Diane replied, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice. "If I'm going to confess to crimes that will send me to prison, I deserve to at least know that she's okay." A particularly loud clap of thunder made the ground vibrate. For a moment, Richard thought he saw movement in the shadows behind Diane, but the torrential rain made it difficult to be sure. Inside the warehouse, Lily struggled against the restraints that held her wheelchair in place. The air was getting heavier and heavier, a greenish mist beginning to form near the ground. Her chest ached with the effort of breathing, but she refused to give up. Aunt Helen always said she was strong like her father, and now, more than ever, she needed to prove it. With trembling fingers, she managed to reach something in her pocket, a small Swiss Army knife that Richard had given her days before in the hospital for emergencies. At the time, she didn't understand why she would need such a tool. Now, she silently thanked him for his foresight. Outside, Diane finally relented. 5 minutes. After that, either you sign or... She raised the remote control significantly. Richard entered the warehouse slowly, his eyes taking a few seconds to adjust to the dim light. When he finally located Lily, his heart almost stopped. The girl was pale, beads of sweat trickling down her face as she worked discreetly on something in her lap. "Rich," she whispered when he approached, quickly hiding the knife. "The air. There's something wrong with the air." "I know, little one," he replied softly, pretending to check the restraints while actually assessing her progress in cutting them. "Just hang in there." "She killed Daddy," Lily murmured, so low that he could barely hear. "I saw one night she putting something in his tea. But nobody would believe a kid in a wheelchair." Richard's heart clenched with the revelation. All this time, Lily had carried this weight alone, this terrible knowledge. "Time's up!" Diane's voice sounded from the entrance of the warehouse. "Have you decided?" It was then that several events occurred simultaneously. A deafening crash shook the building, causing Diane to lose her balance momentarily. Lily finally managed to cut the last restraint, and three figures emerged from the shadows in the back of the warehouse. "It's over, Diane." Helen's voice cut through the air like a whip. Diane spun around quickly, her eyes widening as she saw the sister-in-law. She believed she had eliminated. "Impossible, you're dead," Helen completed, advancing slowly. "Like Mark, like Ricardo, you know what your mistake was, thinking that you were always one step ahead of everyone." Maria Elena and Dr. Paula positioned themselves strategically, blocking the possible escape routes. In their hands, they carried the documents that proved all of Diane's crimes. "It doesn't matter." Diane regained her composure, raising the remote control. "One press of this button and everyone here." "Looking for this?" Lily's voice sounded surprisingly firm. In her hands, she held a small device that had been connected to the chemical tanks. "I found it while cutting the ropes. Seems important." Diane's face lost all color as she realized that the control in her hand was useless without the receiver. Her perfect plan was crumbling before her eyes. "You don't understand," she tried one last time, her voice taking on that sugary tone that she had used so often to manipulate people. "Everything I did was for yourself," Helen cut her off. "It was always all about you, your comfort, your ambition. But you know what you never understood? The true power of family isn't in the money or the properties. It's in the strength that Ricardo passed on to his daughter. The same strength that kept me alive all these months, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment." The rain began to subside outside, as if nature itself recognized that the storm inside the warehouse was coming to an end. But there was still one last card to be played, a last moment of danger that no one could have predicted. Because Diane Ruth, like a cornered snake, still had one last venom to spread. The air inside the warehouse grew denser with each second, the greenish mist now reaching knee-height. Diane backed away slowly towards a side door, her calculating, eyes assessing each person present, like a chess player considering her last options. "You really think it's over?" she laughed, a high-pitched hysterical sound that echoed off the metal walls. "You think some papers will change anything? I have connections, I have important people on my side. In a week, all this evidence will mysteriously disappear." "Not this time." Maria Elena stepped forward, her cell phone in hand. "Every document has already been scanned and sent to multiple recipients. The district attorney's office, the press, child protection organizations. There's no way to cover up the case now." Richard used the distraction to move closer to Lily, positioning himself protectively next to her wheelchair. The girl still held the disconnected device, her small fingers trembling slightly, but her gaze remained steady, fixed on the stepmother who had caused her so much harm. "You know what's most ironic?" Helen said, her voice laden with an ancient sadness. "Ricardo really loved you in the beginning, before he started to suspect, before the mysterious pains, before the tampered documents. He believed he had found someone to help him raise Lily." Something flickered on Diane's face, a fraction of a second of vulnerability quickly replaced by her habitual mask of control. "Love? Love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't buy the kind of life I deserve." "And what kind of life is that?" Dr. Paula questioned, her voice professional but filled with repulsion. "One built on death and suffering, on drugging an innocent child until she was almost dead." "She was already broken!" Diane exploded, pointing at Lily. "A crippled little girl who sucked up all the resources, all the attention. Do you know how much it costs to maintain someone like that? The treatments, the special equipment. Money was never a problem," Lily interrupted, her voice small but clear. "Daddy left everything organized. You were the one who spent it on other things. I saw the statements on the computer when you thought I was asleep." Diane paled. What are you talking about? The transfers to overseas accounts, the deposits to people who never came to the house, the money you sent to that bad lawyer. Impossible, Diane whispered. You're just a child. You couldn't understand. I understand more than you think, Lily continued, a surprising strength in her young voice. I understand that you never loved me, that you only stayed with me for Daddy's money, that you hurt good people like Aunt Helen because they discovered the truth. The rain outside had stopped completely now, leaving only the sound of dripping water and the heavy breathing of those present echoing through the warehouse. The chemical fog continued to rise slowly, a silent reminder of the danger that had not yet passed. We need to get out of here, Dr. Paula warned, noting how the air was getting harder to breathe. The chemical vapors. No one is going anywhere, Diane screamed, her composure finally breaking completely. From inside her blazer, she pulled out a small glass vial. You know what this is. The same compound I used on Ricardo. So easy to disguise in food or drink, so hard to detect in an autopsy. Diane, no! Helen took a step forward, recognizing the immediate danger. Enough deaths! Enough when I say it's enough, she retorted, uncapping the vial. The liquid inside it gleamed ominously under the fluorescent lights. If I can't have what's rightfully mine, no one will. It was then that something unexpected happened. Lily, who everyone thought was paralyzed with fear, began to laugh, a soft, almost musical laugh that caught everyone by surprise, especially Diane. What are you laughing at, you brat? At your mistake, Lily replied simply. The same mistake you always make, thinking I'm weak just because I can't walk. With a quick movement that no one expected, Lily threw the device she was holding, not towards Diane, but upwards. The small metal object hit one of the fluorescent lights, causing a short circuit that plunged part of the warehouse into darkness. In the momentary confusion, several things happened at once. Richard lunged towards Diane. Maria Elena ran to open the main doors, allowing the toxic air to escape, and Helen did something she had been secretly planning for 8 months. With the precision of someone who had studied every detail, every movement, she flipped a hidden switch on the wall, part of the warehouse's antiquated ventilation system that Diane didn't even know still worked. The sound of industrial fans erupted in the environment, rapidly dispersing the chemical fog. But more importantly than that, the sudden gust of air made Diane stumble, the vial slipping from her fingers. No! She screamed, trying to grab the falling glass. But it was too late. The vial shattered at her feet, the deadly liquid spreading harmlessly across the concrete floor. It's over, Richard declared, holding Diane's arms firmly before she could try anything else. It's really over, but there was still one last surprise in store for that night, one that no one, not even Diane in all her meticulous planning, could have foreseen. The sound of sirens began to echo in the distance, cutting through the silence that had settled in the warehouse after the vial fell. But they weren't police sirens, as everyone expected. The distinct sound of approaching ambulances made Dr. Paula raise her head in alarm. Something is wrong, she murmured, observing how Diane, even immobilized by Richard, maintained an unsettling smile on her face. What did you do? Helen asked, a chill running down her spine as she recognized that expression. The same one her sister-in-law displayed on the days when Ricardo mysteriously worsened. Me, Diane replied with feigned innocence. I didn't do anything, but maybe someone should check Lily's blood oxygen levels. You know how sensitive she is. All eyes turned to the girl in the wheelchair. At first, she seemed fine, still holding on with the same determination as minutes before. But then Richard noticed. Her breathing was different, more shallow, and a subtle pallor was beginning to spread across her face. What's happening to her? He demanded, shaking Diane slightly. The woman's smile only widened. Let's just say That chemical fog wasn't the only surprise I prepared. Sometimes the most effective poison is the one that's already in the system before the battle even begins. Dr. Paula rushed to Lily, her professional fingers quickly checking pulse and temperature. "She's going into anaphylactic shock," she declared, her voice tense. "We need epinephrine now." "The medications!" Maria Elena exclaimed, remembering. Suddenly, at the hospital, when Diane visited her last... "Exactly," Diane laughed, a cold, calculated sound. "One last gift from Mom Diane. Something special in the water I gave her to drink. A compound that would take hours to take effect. But when it did, she left the sentence unfinished, savoring the growing panic on the others' faces." Helen let out an anguished cry and ran to her niece, taking her small hands in her own. "Hold on, my love. Help is coming." But Lily, even with her breathing becoming increasingly difficult, maintained a surprising calm, her eyes, although clouded by pain, fixed on Diane with a disturbing intensity. "You," she managed to say between gasping breaths, "still haven't learned." "What?" Diane asked, her arrogance momentarily shaken by the girl's serenity. "That not all medicine is bad." Before anyone could understand the meaning of those words, Dr. Paula let out an exclamation of surprise. Rummaging in Lily's coat pocket, she found something, an epinephrine pen. "How?" she began to ask, but Lily, even in her weakened state, managed to give a small smile. "Rich," she explained with difficulty, "gave it to me, along with the knife, said I needed to be prepared." The doctor wasted no time. With the precision of years of practice, she administered the injection into Lily's leg. The effect was almost immediate. Her breathing began to normalize, the color gradually returning to her face. Diane watched the scene with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Her perfect plan, her last gambit, destroyed by a simple precaution. "Impossible," she muttered. "Impossible." "No," Richard replied, his voice filled with a contained satisfaction. "Not impossible. Just the result of something you never understood. The power of really caring about someone." The sirens were closer now, and through the open doors of the warehouse, emergency lights began to illuminate the night. But before the paramedics arrived, Lily had one more surprise in store. With her strength renewed by the epinephrine, she straightened up in her wheelchair and faced her stepmother. "There's one more thing you don't know," she said, her voice still weak but firm. "What are you talking about?" Diane asked, her tone still arrogant despite the obvious defeat. "About the day you tried to drown me, about why Rich was really flying over that area." All those present, including Richard himself, turned their attention to Lily. There was something in her voice, a certainty that suggested she held one last crucial piece of the puzzle. "Aunt Helen," she continued, "wasn't alone all this time. She had help, someone who monitored your every move, every attempt to hurt other people." Helen's eyes widened, comprehension dawning on her face. "The pilot," she whispered. "That day, in the helicopter, it wasn't a coincidence." Richard felt a chill run down his spine as he remembered his pilot on that fateful day, a silent man who had insisted on flying over that specific area, even though it wasn't part of the planned route. "Carlos," he murmured, remembering how his friend, the notary public, always seemed to know more than he said. "Carlos was helping you all this time?" Helen nodded slowly. "He was the only one I trusted when I discovered the truth about Ricardo. We set up a safety net, trusted people watching, waiting. We knew that Diane would try something drastic eventually." "No!" Diane struggled in Richard's arms, her mask of control completely destroyed. "You can't prove anything. You have no evidence of anything." "We have all the evidence," Maria Elena replied calmly, raising her folder of documents. Every move you've made over the last few years is recorded here. Every suspicious transfer, every forged prescription, every attempt to alter documents. And there's more, Lily added, her voice gaining strength. There's the flash drive. What? Flash drive? Diane stopped struggling, a new kind of fear rising in her eyes. The one that Daddy hid before he died. The one you searched for so long in the old house. Lily smiled, a sad smile that made her look much older than her 5 years. He knew you were poisoning him. He recorded everything, every conversation, every moment you thought no one was paying attention. The sound of the sirens reached its peak as the first police cars parked outside the warehouse. Blue and red lights danced across the walls of the warehouse, creating distorted shadows that seemed appropriate for that moment of final revelations. But there was still one last revelation to be made, one that no one expected. As the paramedics began to move Lily's stretcher towards the ambulance, the girl opened her eyes one last time and called for Richard. Rich, her voice was just a whisper now. There's one more thing you need to know. He approached, leaning in to hear better, while still holding Diane firmly with one hand. What Lily said next made his heart stop for a moment, a truth so unexpected that it would change not only the course of that night, but the future of all those involved. Daddy, she murmured, left a letter for you. One that he wrote long before all this happened. It's... And with those words, Lily finally succumbed to exhaustion, her eyes closing, as the paramedics hastened her transport to the hospital. But that unfinished sentence hung in the air like a promise, a last mystery that needed to be solved. The sound of handcuffs being placed on Diane's wrists echoed through the warehouse, marking the end of her reign of terror. But for all those present, it was clear that the story was not completely over. Because somewhere, hidden like so many other secrets that night had revealed, there was a letter, a message from the past that could change everything once again. The hospital hallway was silent that early morning, except for the soft sound of the heart monitor in the room where Lily rested. Richard remained seated beside her bed, watching the peaceful rise and fall of her chest, while his mind tried to process the events of the last few hours. Helen had gone with Maria Elena to the police station to give a formal statement and hand over all the evidence, including the flash drive that had been hidden in the wheelchair for so long. Dr. Paula, after ensuring that Lily was stable, had finally agreed to go and get some rest, promising to return first thing in the morning. It was then that Carlos, the notary public, quietly entered the room, carrying a worn leather folder that Richard had never seen before. "How is she?" he asked in a low voice, approaching the bed. "Better," Richard replied, running a hand over his tired face. "The doctors say she'll make a full recovery. The antidote worked." Carlos nodded, pulling up a chair to sit down. For a few moments, he just watched the sleeping girl before finally speaking. "I found something you need to see." Carefully, he opened the folder and removed a yellowed envelope sealed with red wax. In the center, the initials RV, Ricardo Vespers. "Where?" Richard began to ask, but Carlos gently interrupted him. "Ricardo gave me this almost a year ago, shortly before he died. He said it was to be opened only under very specific circumstances." He paused meaningfully. "If someone named Richard..." Harding appeared in Lily's life. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he took the envelope. "How could he have known?" "Read it," Carlos replied simply. "Some things only make sense when the time is right." Carefully, so as not to make any noise that might wake Lily, Richard opened the envelope. Inside, there were several handwritten pages, the writing firm but hurried, as if the author knew his time was limited. "Dear Richard, if you are reading this letter, it means that my suspicions were confirmed and that somehow you have found my daughter. It also means that I am no longer here to protect her, and that the gears I set in motion before my death have finally begun to turn. You must be wondering how I could have known your name, how I could be sure that our paths would cross. The answer lies in a story that began long ago, in a small hospital in the countryside, where a young doctor made a terrible mistake that cost the life of a patient. Your sister, Marina. I was that doctor, Richard. The resident who, through inexperience and overconfidence, did not recognize the signs of a complication that could have been avoided. The doctor who carried that guilt for years, who changed specialties and eventually abandoned medicine, unable to continue after that loss. I followed your life from afar, saw how that tragedy transformed you, how you channeled your pain to help others, how you built your ranch, focused on animal-assisted therapy for special needs children. And when Lily was born, when the doctors said she would never walk, I knew that one day our paths would cross again. Because you, Richard, are the kind of man who cannot turn his back on someone who needs help. You are the kind of man my daughter would need when I was no longer here. I began to realize that something was wrong a few months after I married Diane. Small things at first, documents out of place, strange conversations on the phone, medications that I had not prescribed. When I finally put all the pieces together, it was too late. The poison was already in my system, and I knew I didn't have much time. But instead of confronting her directly, I used my last months to prepare everything. The recordings, the hidden documents, the safety net that included Helen, Carlos, and others. And more importantly, I created a path that I knew would eventually lead you to Lily. What you need to know now is that there is more at stake than just the custody of a child or the management of some properties. In recent years, I have developed a project, a revolutionary rehabilitation center combining animal therapy and conventional treatments. All the money that Diane coveted so much was intended for this. The blueprints, the licenses, all the planning is hidden in a place that only Lily knows, although she doesn't know it yet. It is a project that could help hundreds of children like her. And you, Richard, with your experience and your heart, are the perfect person to make it a reality. There are more documents in this envelope, legal papers, authorizations, everything you will need, but the most important thing is not on paper. It is in the love that I know you have already developed for my daughter, in the way I know you will protect her and guide her. I cannot undo what happened to your sister. That guilt will always be mine to carry, even beyond death. But perhaps, through Lily, through this project, we can transform two tragedies into something that will bring hope to many. Take care of her, Richard, not just as a guardian, but as the father she will need. And remember, sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as coincidences. With gratitude and hope, Ricardo Vespers. Richard finished reading the letter with tears in his eyes, his hands shaking so much that Carlos gently took the pages before they fell. "Did you know?" he asked the notary public. "Only that there was a connection," Carlos replied softly. "Ricardo made me promise that I would only reveal everything at the right time." A small movement in the bed caught the two men's attention. Lily was waking up slowly, her eyes blinking against the soft light of the room. "Rich," she called, her voice still hoarse from sleep. "I'm here, little one," he replied, holding her hand. "Did you find the letter?" she asked, surprising him. "Daddy said that one day you would read it. In my dream, he was smiling." Udi. Richard swallowed the lump in his throat. "Yes, I found it. Did you know about it?" Lily shook her head slightly. "Just that it existed. Daddy made me promise to keep a secret too. Want to see?" With movements still a bit slow from the medication, she reached for the little teddy bear that Richard had given her at the hospital, the same one she hadn't let go of during the entire ordeal in the warehouse. Carefully, she opened a small zipper hidden on the bear's back and pulled out a tiny golden key. Daddy said that when the right person came, I would know. And I knew, Rich. Ever since the day you saved me, I knew. The key shone softly under the light of the room, another secret waiting to be revealed, another piece of the puzzle that Ricardo Vespers had left for them to assemble together. The next morning dawned clear and fresh, without any trace of the storm from the night before. Lily had been discharged from the hospital and was now sitting in her wheelchair in the garden of Richard's ranch, watching with wide eyes the horses grazing in the distance. Helen, who had not left her niece's side since leaving the police station, adjusted a shawl over her shoulders against the morning breeze. "The key," Lily said softly, twirling the small golden object between her fingers. "Daddy said it opened something special on his ranch, the old ranch where we lived. Before..." Richard, who was reviewing some documents with Carlos and Maria Elena on the porch, approached upon hearing the girl's words. "The ranch that was sold." "Not exactly," Carlos intervened, consulting a folder. "The main ranch was sold. Yes, but there was a smaller property adjacent to it that Ricardo kept in Lily's name through a holding company. It's all here in the documents he left." "And no one knew about this?" Helen asked, surprised. "Not even Diane?" "She knew that there was another property," Maria Elena explained, "but she couldn't locate the documents. It was another one of the protections that Ricardo established." Lily squeezed the key tighter. "Can we go there, please?" The adults exchanged glances. Dr. Paula had recommended rest, but there was something in Lily's eyes, a mixture of anxiety and hope, that made it impossible to deny her request. "All right," Richard decided, "but we'll take it easy, okay?" The old property was less than an hour's drive away. During the trip, Lily was unusually quiet, her eyes fixed on the landscape passing by the window. From time to time, she squeezed the little key that she now wore hanging on a chain around her neck, a gift from Helen that morning. When they finally arrived, everyone understood why Ricardo had kept that place a secret. It was a sheltered valley, surrounded by gentle hills, and cut by a crystal-clear stream. In the center, an old but well-maintained building stood, its stone walls partially covered by flowering vines. "This is it," Lily whispered, her eyes shining with recognition. "Daddy used to bring me here sometimes, just the two of us. He said it was our special place." Richard pushed her chair along the stone path to the entrance of the building. The key fit perfectly into the old lock, turning with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silence of the valley. The interior was surprising. Instead of the abandonment they expected to find, there were spacious and well-planned areas, with gentle ramps in place of stairs and handrails strategically positioned on the walls. Large windows let in natural light, illuminating what had clearly been designed as a rehabilitation center, Richard murmured, recognizing the elements that Ricardo had mentioned in his letter. "He really planned everything. There," Lily pointed to a door at the end of the main hallway, "Daddy's office." Inside the office, they found more than just blueprints and documents. There were photographs on the walls, children in different stages of rehabilitation, some in wheelchairs like Lily, others with different special needs. And on a special shelf, protected by a glass dome, was a scrapbook. "Can I?" Lily asked, reaching out for the scrapbook. Helen carefully removed the dome and handed the album to her niece. In the first pages, there were news reports about Richard's work with animal-assisted therapy, photographs of his ranch, articles about his innovative methods, all carefully dated and organized. "He followed your every step," Carlos commented softly, "even after what happened to your sister." Richard felt his throat tighten with emotion. In all those reports, in all those years, he had never known that he was being watched by the man who had the most reason to hate him, But there was more. In a locked drawer of the desk, which the little key also opened, they found detailed folders with all the planning for the center, feasibility studies, pre-approved partnerships with hospitals and institutions, even a substantial fund set aside specifically for the operation. "Look," Lily exclaimed, pulling an envelope from inside one of the folders. On it, in Ricardo's familiar handwriting, was written, "For when you find this place." Inside, there was a single sheet of paper with a few lines written, "To Lily, my brightest star. This place has always been yours, not just a rehabilitation center, but a symbol that our limitations do not define who we are." To Richard, "Now you understand why it had to be you. Some debts cannot be paid with money or words, but with the chance to make a difference in the lives of others." To Helen, "Thank you for never giving up, for protecting the secrets until the right moment." The name of the center is recorded on the last page of the album. I chose it long ago when I first dreamed of this project. With eternal love, Ricardo. With trembling hands, Lily turned to the last page of the album. There, in golden letters on a soft blue background, was the name that her father had chosen. Marina and Lily Rehabilitation Center, where dreams take flight. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft sound of Lily's crying. Not tears of sadness, but of understanding, of a circle finally closing. Richard knelt beside her chair, also with tears in his eyes, while Helen hugged them both. Maria Elena and Carlos watched the scene with respect, understanding that they were witnessing not only the discovery of a project, but the birth of a new family, forged through pain, redemption, and above all, love. But there was still one last surprise waiting for them in that quiet valley, one that would forever change Lily's life and prove that some miracles happen exactly when we need them most. 6 months had passed since the discovery of the valley. The Marina and Lily Rehabilitation Center had been inaugurated with a simple ceremony without great fanfare, exactly as Ricardo would have wanted. The first children were already beginning to arrive, bringing life and joy to the corridors that had remained silent for so long. On that particular spring morning, Lily was in one of the physical therapy rooms, working with her new therapist, Dr. Sophia. What had started as regular strengthening sessions had evolved into something more. Small movements in her toes, sensations that were slowly returning to the legs that had remained immobile for so long. "That's right, Lily," Sophia encouraged, gently supporting Lily's back as she struggled to stand on the parallel bars. 5 more seconds. Outside the room, through the glass window, Richard watched the scene with a full heart. Beside him, Helen smiled, holding a folder with Lily's latest test results. "Dr. Paula said it's a miracle," Helen commented softly. "Years of wrong medications masked her true condition. Now that her body is free of the drugs, now she can finally heal," Richard completed, his voice choked with emotion. Lily's recovery had surprised everyone. When the doctors finally had access to her original exams, they discovered that her condition had never been as permanent as Diane had made everyone believe. The misguided treatment and constant sedatives had prevented any progress. "Rich, Aunt Helen, look!" Lily's animated voice drew their attention back to the room. Supported on the bars and with Sophia by her side, she had managed to take 2 complete steps, small and unsteady, but undoubtedly steps. The 2 rushed into the room, quickly, arriving in time to see the radiant smile on the girl's face before her legs gave way. Richard caught her in his arms before she could fall, twirling her in the air as she laughed, a sound that now filled the ranch house daily. "Did you see?" she asked, her eyes shining. "I did it." "Yes, we did, my love," Helen replied, wiping away tears of joy. Your father would be so proud." "He is," Lily said with certainty, settling into her chair as Sophia made notes in her chart. "He's always watching over us." Later that day, after the last physical therapy session had ended, Richard took Lily for a walk in the valley. It was a ritual they had developed, a moment just for them to talk about the day, about their fears and hopes. "You know what I like most here?" Lily asked as they watched the sunset paint the sky pink and gold. "What?" "That everyone can be who they really are. No one needs to pretend or hide." Richard smiled, perfectly understanding what she meant. The center had become more than a treatment center. It was a refuge where broken people could heal, where sad stories could find new endings. "Speaking of being who you really are," he cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. "There's something. I wanted to ask you something." Lily turned in her chair to look at him better, curious about his serious tone. "You know that I love you like you were my own daughter, right?" he began, his heart beating fast. "These last few months, having you and Helen living on the ranch, well, you've become my family." Lily's eyes widened slightly, as if she was starting to understand where the conversation was going. "So, I wanted to know," Richard continued, pulling an envelope from his shirt pocket, "if you'd like to make it official, if you'd like me to become your dad, legally." Lily took the envelope with trembling hands. It was the adoption papers, already prepared by Carlos, just waiting for a signature to make official what their hearts had already known for months. You really want to?" she asked, in a whisper. "Even though I'm not perfect," Richard completed, kneeling beside her chair. "But you are perfect, Lily. Exactly the way you are. With your strength, your courage, your huge heart that even after everything you've been through still manages to love so deeply." Tears streamed freely down Lily's face now. "Yes," she replied, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The hug lasted several minutes, both crying and laughing at the same time. When they finally separated, Richard had one more surprise. "There's one more thing," he said, a mysterious smile on his face. "Actually, it's a surprise that Helen helped me prepare." As if she had heard her name, Helen appeared on the path leading to the center, leading something that made Lily's eyes fill with new tears. A small, gentle pony, specially trained for equine therapy. "This is Spirit," Richard introduced as the animal approached calmly. "He's going to be your physical therapy partner from now on. Dr. Sophia said that hippotherapy will greatly help in your recovery." Lily reached out a trembling hand to stroke the pony's soft muzzle, which snorted softly in approval. "He's perfect," she whispered. "Like our family," Helen added softly, placing a hand on Richard's shoulder. The sun finished setting on the horizon, painting the valley with the last colors of the day. In the rehabilitation center, the lights began to turn on, creating a beacon of hope in the growing twilight. Somewhere, Richard was sure, Ricardo and Marina were smiling. As he watched Lily interacting with Spirit, her laughter mingling with the sound of the stream and the singing of the birds returning to their nests, Richard felt a peace that he never thought he would find after his sister's death. There, in that valley that had guarded so many secrets and that now witnessed so many new beginnings, a simple truth was revealed. Sometimes, the greatest tragedies can lead to the greatest miracles, and sometimes the strongest families are those forged not by blood, but by love, by shared pain, and by hope that never dies. "Let's go home?" he asked, as the first stars began to appear in the sky. "Yes," Lily replied, her smile illuminating the nascent night. "Let's go home, Dad." And so, under a starry sky that seemed to bless that moment, a new family followed its path home, leaving behind the shadows of the past and walking together towards a future full of possibilities, love, and healing.